instead of saying I don't like something, I need to get used to reframing it in my head and saying that composer is interested in different things than I'm interested in. And then once you turn that switch, then you can see the piece as being really valuable. You can see it as being really beautifully made. And it's just about things that don't necessarily interest you, you know? And so I've found that really helpful also in judging competitions, where I look at within the world of what this composer is interested in, how well is this piece accomplishing its goals. Yeah, I would, as a composer, be interested in writing very different sorts of things for my own output, but it would be really small-minded of me. I would even telescope that out to say it would be really small-minded of all of us to confuse what is good with what we like.
No, I know you from our time in Beijing in China, and I had a piece on that program. It was an orchestral piece.
Right, Takt,
yeah.
Yep.
Piece I wrote in 2016, and was selected to be performed there by the orchestra in Beijing. And I don't remember, you had a piece on as well?
No, I was there. I go to ISCM every year, but that year I was chairing the jury that was selecting the Young Composers Award, and your piece was eligible for it. So I remember hanging out with you, but also being like, I can't talk to him about his piece because I'm also a juror on the panel that it's eligible for. So
this festival is really interesting, the International Society of Contemporary Music, correct? Because it happens every single year.
Yeah, it got pandemicked for a couple of years, but otherwise it's been happening every year for 100 years now.
And I remember, if I remember correctly, the people that started it were like heavy hitters, like Hindemith. I don't remember who the others were. But
I don't remember the exact list, but it was some of the top composers of that era in the 1920s were frustrated about how they were operating in silos within their own countries, and so they formed this organization for the same reason it exists today, to have an international forum where every country can sort of bring its best composers and new compositions to the fore. And so it's like the Olympics in that it's held in a different city around the world every year. So in the last 15 years, I've gone to, they call it the ISCM World Music Days. I've gone to it in Australia and Belgium and Lithuania and Slovenia and China, and Estonia was the year after China. So it's been a really rewarding partnership's the wrong word, an organization to be part of. Because I always come home feeling like I put my finger on the pulse of contemporary music around the world. Like I get to hear a lot of really cool stuff, find out what's going on in countries I wouldn't otherwise hear about.
And how do people apply to be a part of this thing? Like if they want their piece to be performed there?
Yeah, ISCM is an organization of organizations. So the members of ISCM, other than its honorary members who are composers, the membership consists of organizations, the Canadian Composers Guild, or the the Australian Music Center, national-based representatives of composers join, and then they submit works from their region to be considered to be programmed. And then there's also an individual submission process where people can individually submit directly to the organizers. So the host, whoever's hosting it, selects works from that huge pool of applicants from all over the world, and so you end up with a really diverse program.
Yeah, I remember when I was selected, I thought it was crazy, because I thought, oh wow, I didn't even have to apply to this thing. I was so used to applying to contests and things like this, and always putting my name out there and things like this. But I remember Franco Terry, who we both know, he heard this orchestra piece at, I think it was a reading. I think it was at the Minnesota Orchestra reading, actually. Frank, he heard it there, and like immediately he wanted to have this played. I was like, wow, is that how things happen when you write something, halfway decent? Because I always thought, as soon as you write the thing, you got to sell the thing. It's not, it doesn't sell itself, that whole trope of, the music speaks for itself. I never really believed in that, actually. I always thought, okay, I wrote the thing got played, okay, I gotta sell it somehow. It doesn't speak for itself, but I was wrong in that.
More than two settings. Like, it's not just you either sell it or it sells itself. Like, I think both can happen. In this case, you were really fortunate that the right people heard it at the right time.
Yeah.
And then it got propelled to be played by, a really great orchestra on an international stage like that. So that was a right place at the right time thing for sure. But it's also a really good piece.
Well, I mean, thank you, but it's when you're at that guy. How old was I? I mean, I guess I was 6 years ago. That would be 23, 24. I mean, at that time, you don't know how anything happens, and I
Right.
still don't really know. I have a little bit of a better idea now, but at that time, I didn't know how anything happens, and I was thinking to myself, Frank, like, this is the best orchestra piece you heard all year. That can't be that can't be true, and I thought that was really interesting because I remember him saying, oh, you're representing the United States
Right.
with this in the orchestral category, and there are other categories as well. And I was thinking, there's no way that this is the piece that you're picking. But like we were saying earlier before we got on, you kind of have to go with it. If somebody thinks highly of your work, you don't tell them, no, this is not, even though in your head that's what you're thinking, I could have
Right.
done a better job, but you say, no, I thank you for appreciating my work, and I'll go with it. And I would never have been to China, would never have met you.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. And you're part of that it's a wonderful tradition ISCM has created, like Berg's Violin Concerto premiered at an ISCM festival. You're now like part of that lineage. I mean, that's a cool thing to be part of.
Yeah, and I mean, I haven't been back since, of course, because it's going, unless it was in the U.S. I suppose I could go.
Later
when it's
this
in
year,
the
it'll be in
US.
South Africa, the first time in the African continent.
Wow.
And that'll be in November. And then just weeks old now information is that the 2024 World Music Days will be in the Faroe Islands. So,
Fair. I don't even know where that is.
draw a triangle between the British Isles and Norway and Iceland.
Mhm.
And right in the middle of that triangle is some islands that are the Faroe Islands. And they look just like you'd expect as a cross between those three places. So
Jesus.
it's going to be a cool festival.
God. Well, I mean,
You'll have to come.
that's the thing. It's like it's great that they're in all these different places, but it's also difficult to get to these places
Right.
sometimes. Even Beijing, I remember having to stand in line and get my visa approved and all this stuff, and
Yeah.
having to come up with reasons for why I need to be there. It's not a business trip; it's some other kind of trip. It was really crazy.
I had my car towed when I was trying to get my visa to go to China.
Really?
Yeah, I went down to Houston to the Chinese embassy to pick up my visa, and when I came out, my car had been towed. So,
See,
yeah,
it's
hard to get to
It's
China.
difficult, but once you get there, I mean, it was amazing. Okay, so I want to pivot. I want to pivot to something else because I know you're a professor. You're the first professor I've had on this show.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you're the first, so no pressure.
Yeah.
But tell the folks where you teach, because I'm going to screw up the name again.
I teach at Stephen F. Austin State University in East Texas.
Mhm. And to get here, how did you have to eventually get here?
Today,
Yeah.
I got up my alarm went off at 1:20 a.m. and I got out of the house by 2 and drove to the Houston airport. Got there by around 4 and got on my flight that departed at 6:02 a.m. and flew direct to Newark, where you were waiting for me.
So he's dedicated. He's dedicated to make it out here just for the show. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. He's here because of your concert on Saturday.
Yeah, I run a summer program called Composing in the Wilderness, and the 6 compositions that resulted from one of the trips we took composers on this past summer are going to get premiered at Federal Hall on Saturday night.
So, like, to me, when I see you and what you do a lot of different stuff, and it's like, for me, it's crazy because I don't do that many things. I just kind of compose. I do this channel, and I go teach a couple times a week. For me, those are if somebody can ask me what do you do, those are the 3 things. It's very simple to say,
Right.
and my brain isn't like that's all it could take, really. But you do a tremendous amount of things, and you do them all very well. And I'm wondering, how does it all happen? You're a professor. You're a full professor. You're not like not tenured or anything. You're a tenured professor.
Tenured full professor.
You've been doing it for a while. You're married. You have this Composing in the Wilderness project, which I want to talk about some more, of course, since that's why you're here. you're composing. You have a lot of great pieces, a ton of them that you've written over the years, and I'm sure I'm missing something else in that list of things. But probably starting with being a professor, because you were the first one that I've had on. And how did that all come about? And like, what was the transition like from doing? I'm assuming you finished you through all the way to your doctorate, and then
Yeah, I'm a good example of the sort of, if you use the tortoise and the hare analogy, I'm the tortoise for sure. My trajectory, both as a composer and in academia, at least for the first half of it, was a slow and steady wins the race kind of approach. I was not a rock star young composer. I was someone who did good work and was reliable and sort of just continued plodding away at it. And so from, getting a master's at the place where I now work, Stephen F. Austin University, and then going on to get a doctorate at Louisiana State University, then I started doing adjunct work at some community colleges, and then that led to a full-time position at community college, and then a position opened up at my alma mater. So I applied for it and got it. That was 23 years ago, so I've been at SFA for 23 years now. And then sort of did all the natural steps that you do in academia to go through tenure and promotion along the way. So that, I feel like the sort of textbook career for someone in academia is exactly what I did. Get your doctorate, do adjunct work until you've got enough resume value to get a full-time job, then do that at a not-so-great school until you get, enough credibility to be at the top of the pack for a better school. And so it's turned out that SFA has been a fabulous fit for me, and over the 23 years I've been there, the School of Music has just seen exceptional growth and maturity and expanded in all sorts of ways. And so now we're, among of the hundreds and hundreds of music programs in the country, we're among the dozens, maybe 2 or 3 dozen biggest ones. We're one of those, and doing great stuff. And so it's been a rewarding place for me to stay. I haven't ever, since I've been at SFA, I haven't ever decided, maybe I want to move to another position because it's such a good fit for me.
And the other thing I noticed about you too, I mean, besides like this route you've taken, is that it's so different than at least what I'm used to, because I grew up in LA, and now I've been in New York for 8 years. To me, I have this stereotypical like wall of not knowing what's going on between the coasts.
Right.
I am like that person that people talk about on Fox News or whatever, that they don't know what's going on. It's just the coastal elite, whatever.
Well,
I go to Columbia University and all this stuff. And here we are, we're talking. Yeah. So this is another reason I want to have you on. I have no idea what's going on there. And you got your doctorate from LSU, and then you're in Texas teaching. And what would you say the biggest difference is between being over there in that world, and then you come to New York a few times a year, so you see the different changes?
Yeah, it's subtle and it's hard. It would be unfair for me to characterize it as one flavor or another in terms of what's the same and what's different. Certainly, I think that on the East Coast, there is generally, in the composition world, the universe that you and I float around in, I think on the East Coast, there is a greater feeling that composers should be doing things entirely individual, and it should be always breaking new ground. Or even when it doesn't break new ground, there's always sort of the weight in the air of, are you extending the field? Are you carrying on the tradition into the future? And I think in the middle of the country, there's less of that angst, frankly. There's a lot of great composers who are doing cutting edge work in the middle of the country. But also there are a lot of people who are writing fabulous, accessible band pieces for all the band. I mean, every high school and college in the whole country has a band looking for new repertoire, and somebody's supplying those, and those don't need to be the piece that introduce new techniques into the repertoire or introduce new harmonic vocabularies. They need to be fresh and engaging,
Mhm.
and so I think there's a greater sense of freedom to follow those paths. Also, I know at our university and at many universities, there's a growing embracing of sort of the multiple channels that composition exists in now in ways that weren't true when I was a student. I was a student, chamber and concert music is what you studied in academia. So the other thing, sort of thinking about the differences that I see now, are that a lot of programs in the middle of the country, and probably on the coast too, are being more embracing about media scoring and other, collaborative projects, things that I didn't get to really study when I was a student, because I think that back then it was a little more ivory tower-ish and you just wrote chamber and concert music. But now our program is sort of cross-pollinating with our sound recording technology program in really wonderful ways. We've got classes in video game scoring.
Mhm.
And I see a lot of other universities sort of adopting media scoring and interdisciplinary theater scoring, things like that, in ways that didn't used to happen.
Do you find that most of your students now, or is there a healthy kind of mix of people that are interested in the kind of media stuff and people that are interested in like doing concert music or stuff that's like kind of off the
Media
beaten
scoring
path?
and especially video games have really grown over the last 10 years, but we still have a pretty good mix. In Texas in particular, band is like a religion.
Mhm.
We have fabulous music education programs in our public schools in Texas, and the bands are the best you can imagine. They play at the level that professional orchestras play, and so some students will come to us and say, I want to be a composer because I want to write for video games. And that's great. And other students will have been in a band program that just, participated in a consortium commission and had John Mackey come to their school, and they get turned on by the fact that, oh, that's a living composer and I could be one of those. And I love band. And so we still get an awful lot of students who come wanting to be band composers, because they were so inspired by all the cool repertoire they were playing in their high school.
And it's direct, and also seeing the living composer, because I actually didn't see a living composer until high school, but I was in this kind of crazy program with the LA Phil as a young composer fellow. I mean, it was intense. And the composer that I met there, that our mentor composer, was the late Steve Stuckey.
Oh, really wonderful.
Who is like at that time I had no idea, but he is like one of these super established people in the composition world.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I met a John Mackey type person at that age instead, I wonder if things would have been different, just because of that. It's so important when you're that young. Like, what are you being, what are you getting in contact with?
Yeah. We talk a lot as composers about how, the band world is mostly programming music by living or recently dead composers, and the orchestra world not so much, especially in high school programs in particular. But that has a huge impact on who thinks they might want to be a composer.
Yeah.
And what they think they might want to compose. And so over the years, we see more and more band students want to be composers because of exactly this.
Mm-hmm.
A composer came to their high school and they thought, oh, composers are alive? That's cool.
Yeah, this has never happened in my experience. I mean, I grew up playing in bands. Actually, I played the clarinet and then later the saxophone, but we never had a composer come to our high school or middle school. And like I said, that was the first experience I had with a living composer. It was Steve Stuckey, who I see Steve Stuckey, he's writing pieces for orchestra. So, okay, that's what a composer is supposed to be doing.
Right.
And that's the path that I followed. But even before that, I know a lot of composers or people that want to be composers, they hear John Williams or they hear Hans Zimmer or they hear any of these things when they're watching movies, and they think, oh, that's what being a composer is like. So I feel like that more than anything else, like, develops what your aesthetic ends up being.
Right.
That early, it's like learning a language. When you're a young person, you learn English and nothing else. That's what you're gonna. How can you expect them to learn, Chinese 20 years down the road when they only been speaking English the whole time? I feel like it's the same way with composition aesthetics. And when I meet people that are very, very open to hearing different aesthetics, I get excited because, like, why are you, why are you like, you go to ISCM, you're not just hearing the stuff that you like to write. You're hearing you're hearing everything at a conference like that.
Yeah.
So that to me is also very interesting. Like you're in kind of this silo, and I'm also in a silo, a different kind of silo. But in your world, it's more this kind of traditional. Compared to what I do or people that I see in New York do, it's traditional, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I see that as something that's viable and something that should continue. It's not something like Boulez says, we shouldn't do that anymore.
Right.
But if you talk to many of the people that I know, perhaps they would think, I don't like that. Why would you even listen to that?
Well, you bring up ISCM. One of the things that I am always reminded at ISCM that is germane to this exact point you're making is that instead of saying I don't like something, I need to get used to reframing it in my head and saying that composer is interested in different things than I'm interested in. And then once you turn that switch, then you can see the piece as being really valuable. You can see it as being really beautifully made. And it's just about things that don't necessarily interest you, And so I've found that really helpful also in judging competitions where I look at, is this piece, it within the world of what this composer is interested in, how well is this piece accomplishing its goals? I would, as a composer, be interested in writing very different sorts of things for my own output, but it would be really small-minded of me. I would even telescope that out to say it would be really small-minded of all of us to confuse what is good with what we like. There are things, we like certain foods and we dislike other foods. That doesn't make the other foods bad, right? It's just we don't like them. And so, or we don't prefer them. So I think stylistically, going to these places like ISCM, or even for me, even coming to New York City and seeing concerts that are different than what I would see in Texas, that's a great reminder about how we all benefit from diversity in the field, from a lot of different composers being interested in a lot of different things. That benefits all of us. And so when I see somebody writing a really good piece that uses techniques or approaches or systems that are things that don't interest me, but they're doing it really well, I should be cheering for them, not saying, I don't like people who do that.
Yeah, I mean, I like this point you bring up about diversity too, because diversity can mean a lot of things.
Right.
And I feel like when people talk about diversity, style is not something that's talked about openly that often. It's always about more, which is fine, surface level things like race, ethnicity, gender, etc. Those are all important things, but I never hear any more discussion of style, this discussion of aesthetic being brought up. It's almost like we almost don't even care that much what the music sounds like as long as as long as we're kind of getting, I'm talking about from an institutional perspective.
Yeah.
As long as we're getting kind of the face that we want, the aesthetic, we don't really care so much about what they do aesthetically. And oftentimes, actually, what happens is the aesthetics are a lot more hampered down than maybe what that organization actually needs. So, I mean, I'm saying a very general thing, obviously, and I'm opening up a can of worms, but it's important to talk about.
It's a can of worms that's worth opening. I would just say those things are not mutually exclusive, and that diversity does benefit all of us in both ways. And so when I was on a speakerphone call with the performers that are doing our concert on Saturday, they're rehearsing the pieces now. I have not heard the pieces. And the first thing they said was how excited they were about how diverse the stylistic content of the program was, which we all found reason to celebrate. Now, it's also a very diverse group in terms of their life backgrounds, their life experiences, where they come from, but I agree with you. I think musical stylistic diversity is really, really healthy for the field. I think that's part of the sort of vacuum that was created in the middle of the last century, where composers and audiences had a period where they weren't really, they were dating other people, and so I think that was largely because the composing community got a sense that there was one right way of doing things, and they stopped encouraging diversity. And the audience, I think that's one of many factors, but the audiences didn't feel like that monolithic way of thinking was necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, some of those remnants still exist today.
Yeah.
especially on the East Coast. I have to say, it's there. That attitude still exists that there is a right way to do things, and that's why I'm really interested about this whole. I know that the Midwest Clinic happens every year. It's Chicago, I believe,
Yep.
right, where they have all these bands come in and all these directors and all these education
Mm-hmm.
type people. And I know you also go there
Yep.
every year or almost every year, right? So
I've been the last 3 years. Yeah.
yeah, so
I didn't. I mean, I missed during the pandemic, but the last three
yeah, of course,
times
but
they've offered it.
I mean, this is something that we don't really see in my East Coast
No, it's
world.
a very
We don't
different
have
world.
we don't have anything like this,
Right.
where we all get together and share ideas. And I wish we did, but there is that mindset that I think we were talking about off camera, that there is like the heaviness about always being on your own. There's nobody's helping me to get to the next step. It's all about me.
Right.
But this attitude that I see from you folks that are at the Midwest Clinic every year. I don't know if everybody knows what I'm talking about, but this annual
it's the
conference.
Midwest Band and Orchestra Clinic. It's Chicago the week before Christmas every year, and it's a vibrantly exciting place to be. A huge conference with exhibitors, all publishers and instrument makers, and performances day after day of high school and college and professional ensembles, large ensembles, and chamber groups. Programming, playing new music, doing high-level concerts. The U.S. Navy Band, Viet Quang had a really terrific piece premiered at Midwest this year by Eighth Blackbird and the U.S. Navy Band, and so it was just. I mean, it's a great place to see and hear new stuff, but especially stuff that educational bands and orchestras, college and high school, like top high schools and all colleges are playing. That's a really great. Fertile ground for new publications. They're looking for new repertoire. And so I think, there's a lot of vacuum that can be filled by composers there. And it's also a great hang with composers. There are loads and loads of composers there. And so we all get together and swap stories and swap business cards and network. And
Yeah, it sounds great. I've never been.
yeah, you'll have to come.
I have to come one of these years, but I wish we had a similar kind of thing out here. You would think that it would work well out here, actually.
Yeah.
It would be very different,
Right,
in a lot of different ways. But I feel like something like that out here would be
Chamber Music
very
America
cool.
happens in New York.
Chamber Music America, but I don't think that is that geared towards
it's chamber
composers.
music. Yeah.
I never hear any composer friends going to something like that.
I haven't been to Chamber Music America, so I
yeah,
don't know.
there you go.
As an example, yeah.
Yeah, or like something like League of American Orchestras,
Mm-hmm.
and also I don't think composers normally go to that kind of thing either. But composers are very, very welcome. I have a sense at this Midwest Clinic. Right?
Yes,
I mean,
and
it's
there's
normal for composers to come, not just educators and musicians.
they like composers to be there, and commissioning happens there. I got a commission there the first year I went, and that converted me. I'm like, oh, I'm going every year. And so there are a lot of people there not only looking for new repertoire, but interested in meeting composers and seeing if they could be part of a consortium commission or something. So yeah, definitely worth doing. And definitely, you're right, as part of the bigger conversation we're having, a great example of how what's going on in the middle of the country, is quite different than the coastal parts of the country. Midwest is probably a good example of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a big city. It's in Chicago.
Right.
It's still in one of these kind of big metropolitan areas, but still the proximity, its location kind of away from New York and LA. I mean, it helped.
Right.
That alone, I think, helps a lot to cultivate that kind of thing. But speaking of commissions, I know we haven't talked about any of your music, and on this channel, I want to bring some more perspectives on the music itself as well. So I'm going to play a little bit of your excerpt here of all the songs that Nature sings for orchestra with the Boulder Philharmonic. Now, this is just an excerpt. We only play about 2 minutes of this piece here, but how did this come about? What was the motivation behind it? And were you happy with it at the end of the day with this big orchestra piece? I mean, I'm sure you have to write months and months to write a piece like this.
Yeah, this was one of the most rewarding collaborations of my career, and it's sort of a longish story, but it's worth telling the long way, because there's a couple sort of life lessons that I learned along the way. It began with a cold email of me emailing a conductor that I didn't know. I mean, literally the first sentence was, "You won't know who I am, but come up," dot dot dot, and I was pitching to Michael Butterman, who is the conductor at Boulder, but was also and still is the conductor of the Shreveport Philharmonic, which is right near my university. So Shreveport Symphony. So I emailed him to see if Shreveport, my local orchestra, might be interested in premiering a work that I hadn't written yet, but was in the middle of, about Gates of the Arctic National Park. So I write pieces about national parks. And didn't hear back from him for a long time, and then suddenly did hear back from him, and he said, "This sounds like a terrific idea, but don't you think Boulder would be a better audience for this than Shreveport?" And of course, I said yes.
Yeah.
And so fast forward, they premiered my piece about Gates of the Arctic National Park, and it was wildly successful for me and for them. The audiences loved it. They're an outdoor themed sort of orchestra
In Boulder.
in Boulder, Colorado, so everybody loves to hike, and so that's how our relationship got started. And then subsequently, Michael Butterman has programmed that piece and some of my other pieces with some of his other orchestras. So he and I had a very stable relationship by the time that all the songs started being talked about. And what happened was Rocky Mountain National Park was turning 100 the year before or 2 years before the National Park Service was turning 100. So we had a confluence of centennials, and 2016 was the year that the National Park Service turned 100. And so the Boulder Phil's team submitted a grant application to the National Endowment for the Arts for a commissioning fee to commission a new work about Rocky Mountain National Park to commemorate both centennials. And Rocky is their local park, is just an hour away for them in Boulder. And so I had been the artist in residence at Rocky Mountain National Park already. So there are all these pieces that were already in place, and they got funded for the grant, and so they commissioned me to write this piece. It was right from the beginning, they wanted a piece. Well, we cooked this idea up together that it would involve projected imagery. So this was a piece that was written knowing that there would be projected imagery with it ahead of time. And so I sort of created the idea for what that imagery would do and then how the music would complement that. So those two things evolved at the same time. And I selected the imagery. Some of it's mine, but much of it is from the National Park Service. And then I wrote the piece. And then while I was finishing the piece, they got a further big bonus, and they were selected as one of the 4 orchestras for the first year of the Kennedy Center's Shift Festival, which is a festival of American orchestras. And so that same year they were premiering my piece, we also got then to take it to the Kennedy Center and perform it there as part of this National Festival of Orchestras, along with some other great orchestras. So the performance came off great. I felt like it was a really, really terrific project that we worked on together.
So I mean, it sounded like there had to be a lot of moving parts that worked all in sync together for
Yeah.
a big orchestra piece to happen like this. It
Yeah,
doesn't
it
just
was-
happen on its own.
Right. It's a confluence of lots of things, lots of, we couldn't have planned those centennials and the NEA grant and all those things just happened to all flow together to come to a culmination that was really wonderful.
But it all started with you sending that email just as an
Yeah.
idea. So
Yeah, and that was
it
for a
came
whole
out from
different
you.
piece.
Right.
But that's why I wanted to rewind back there, because as composers, probably the people who are watching this, I
Yeah,
know
they're all
you and
mostly composers.
yeah,
Yeah,
we all struggle with this cold call kind of fear of we know we sometimes need to approach groups about doing things who don't know who we are, and we're afraid it won't pan out, and absolutely it won't pan out if you don't do it. And so that life lesson of sometimes you just got to throw your stuff out into the universe and see what sticks. And this one happened to stick, and then it led to other things that stuck even better.
but I feel like you were smart about it because you had a real reason to contact these specific orchestras. There was an idea that made sense for them.
Right.
See, because about 6 years ago or so, around the time that we met, actually, I did this whole cold calling thing or cold emailing thing, and I had this whole method, and I collected like 300 emails, and it was crazy, because I had maybe 5-6 orchestral pieces at that time that were all performed. I had recordings, and I thought, okay, let's see where this goes.
Right.
And absolutely none of them worked out. I was 0 for 300 or whatever the number was.
Yeah.
I did get maybe like 20% or so to send me a nice email back. Thank you for sending this, like this kind of, which I thought was not bad, 20%, but none of them actually ended up panning out because I feel like, there was no, for lack of a better word, angle, I guess. But it seems like you had an idea that made sense. It was like, how can I add value to what this orchestra is doing? Like, of course, you want to have a piece played, but what's in it for them? And the way that, and it's also natural for you because that's what, lack of a, sorry for the pun, but yeah, it's natural for you to go off of this kind of idea.
You're right.
It
This
comes
me
easy to you.
stumbling into being, as I say, an adventurer composer. Me stumbling into that, pieces about national parks, pieces inspired by wilderness. That has become a creative space that I've been able to fill. That is, interestingly, I didn't start doing that for any kind of savvy reasons.
Yeah,
I did it because that's where my passions were.
Yeah.
We all write music. We write music about what inspires us. Like, we get inspired, we write music. So I go to natural places. I go to wilderness. That's what inspires me. And so it was very natural for that to start becoming part of my output. And then I discovered, yes, as you say, that there are programming reasons why that can fit a program. Somebody's doing the Alpine Symphony and they want other natural pieces to go with it. Or the Centennial of the National Park Service is coming along and they want to do park-related pieces.
But that's not something that you can necessarily plan until you figure out what it is you like, because that kind of thing could be applied to a million other different ideas.
Right.
The nice thing about especially the orchestral world, well, any kind of music really, is that there's been music written about everything.
Right.
So you could fit potentially into any type of program that fits the ideas that you like.
Right.
And I found the same kind of thing. They program my pieces with things that are more like, Eastern inspired for whatever kind of issues there are with that. That's just the fact. They would program, like I had pieces programmed with Scheherazade a bunch of times. It is what it is, kind of, because I don't program my own works. They program around, my piece or that piece, etc. So it has to make sense. And the same thing is for you. And none of us are any different too.
Right.
Even when you're a heavy hitter like Glass or Adams or something, there's always those programming considerations being made.
It can be, and I certainly don't have the world's best success record at getting programmed with professional orchestras either, but it can be real helpful if you figure out what stuff your pieces program well with. And then when you approach a new orchestra, you can say, hey, if you're ever doing, this piece that includes this instrumentation, my piece has that same instrumentation and makes a great balancing piece for that. Or thematically, like with my national park pieces, some symphonies like to play Ferdi Groffet's Grand Canyon Suite. And so I can remind orchestras, if you're going to do Grand Canyon Suite, I've got a great piece that could go with that.
That makes a lot of sense.
When you're pitching your own works, often if you're pitching it to someone who's doing the programming for a symphony, having suggestions like that can be really helpful.
Yeah, to get the idea in their head, but at the end of the day, it has to be their idea. I feel like for it to work out. Yeah. But it's a great way to think, because I oftentimes hear people complain, I don't get a program, I don't get this, I don't get that. But it's not always about you, Right. It's actually not about you, really. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about the music and how it fits. Yeah. Most of the music being played today in concert halls is not by people that are living. Right. So it's not about them. It's about the music.
Sometimes an orchestra will have selected 2 or 3 of the pieces for a program, still not have selected what the last 15 minutes will be, but they know what the instrumentation for that concert is. And so you may have a great piece that would match their programming, but the instrumentation just isn't going to make it for that one, because it would change their whole budget for that whole year, which was fixed 19 months ago.
Exactly.
Like, there are a lot of logistical concerns that you're right when you said sometimes it's just not about you, and that's a reality that we face every day.
Yeah, but it's tough for us as composers, because it usually is about us all the time, because we're writing the piece, and you always have to think, what do I like? What do I like? What am I inspired by? What am I writing today? What am I writing tomorrow? Oh, I didn't like what I wrote yesterday. I have to do this. It's always me, and you can't help that, because, and this is something I talk about in a class that I teach. It's this idea of it's almost like the Renaissance, but to the nth degree. This idea of individualism and humanism and expression, and you can't help but have that attitude when you're writing the piece, like not to think about anybody else but what you like. But when you get into any situation where it's anybody but you have to completely flip the script in terms of the way that you're handling that social situation. And I don't think that that's something that I've had to learn. It definitely didn't come easily for me, and I don't think it comes easily for a lot of composers too.
Right.
So, I want to switch gears to this other piece that I really like of yours, this trio. The particle accelerator.
Yeah.
And let's hear a little bit of that now. This piece for flute, oboe, and clarinet. So different than the orchestral work, I think. Like, it's very rhythmic. It's got a lot of play, a lot of counterpoint, a lot of crazy rhythmic changes.
Mm-hmm.
And the players, I feel like the most of all that I noticed from this is that they're having fun playing the piece. So I was just wondering how this one came about, and it sounds like it gets a lot of performances too.
They have performed it a lot. Yeah. So let me back up and I'll tell you the inception of it because it's a fun story. The flute player in that trio formerly worked at my institution. So it was a longtime friend of mine. And she was sitting in a recital where a quintet of mine was being played and was texting me. I was at home watching Stargate reruns, and she was in this concert in the back row being a bad concert attendee texting. And she started saying, "Oh, I'm listening to your piece. Oh, they're playing it too slow." Like, just the snarky things we say to one another in that situation. And so I hadn't heard from her in a while, and one thing led to another, and she said, "Oh, we need to play more of your music." And I said, "Well, don't you think it's time that, you play something new?" Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. And so as a result of that text stream, she put her head together with her trio members and decided that they could each chip in a little bit to do a quick commission. I wanted to write for them, so I wasn't going to charge them a lot of money. And so they, we worked out a commission. And they gave me like their top priorities of what they wanted, and each one of them had a different priority. One of them wanted, I think it was the oboe player who wanted highly technical rhythmic stuff.
Yeah, they got that. Yeah.
Right. I can't remember what each one of them wanted, but I know that was in there. And then one of them wanted interesting harmonic colors and textures, and so. I had just done the ISCM World Music Days in Estonia. It was the year after we met.
Mm-hmm.
And I went directly from there to a composing residency at the Visby International Center for Composers, which is in Sweden on the island of Gotland. And so this is the piece that I wrote there. And I had I'm telling the story because one of the last events I was at ISCM was this mixer event that they throw for composers and conductors and performers and presenters, and they call it the Composer Collider.
Okay.
And it's a name that they've used year after year as they've done this event in different places. And so I had just come a few days ago from the Composer Collider, and that had, of course, made me think, as it would, of the particle accelerator.
Okay, that makes sense. I was going to ask how the title
and
come
so
about.
that was where the mental connection came from, because I didn't have any idea for this piece. I didn't have an idea going into it that it would be programmatic in any way. And so I'm here at this residency in Sweden, and I started thinking about the particle accelerator, and so I started Googling it, and I discovered that the names of the experiments at CERN are so funny and cool that I just had to make them movement titles. So the movements are titled Super Proton Synchrotron and Big European Bubble Chamber. And then the middle movement is called ALICE, which is an acronym for a Large Ion Collider Experiment. And so it's the people who name these experiments, I just think they're so wonderful and Star Trek-y sounding, and sort of, it just felt right that those would be the movement titles. And so once I had those movement titles, then the piece sort of flowed from there. And so it's very, very loosely based on particle physics, but not in any concrete way. I mean, like the middle movement, there are three. If you think of the three instruments, there are three particles that are bound together.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they heat up, they start to break apart. And so they start out very homophonic, doing a thing together that they can't get away from one another. And then slowly their lines become more individual, first one instrument, and then all three of them start floating in their own directions. And then as the experiment cools back down, they coalesce back into a bound.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Almost like a proton, neutron, electron.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
With the three instruments.
Yeah, and likewise the other movements are based on some of the imagery of how the particles split apart and things like that. So it's very loosely, it just basically gave me the very framework of an idea, and then I let the music run with that in the direction that it wanted to. It's a fun piece, and they've played it an awful lot. that summer, the year they commissioned it, they did it at all of the International Flute Association and the Double Reed Society and the Clarinet Association, a couple others too. And then subsequently, I've made a saxophone quartet version of it that it works really well too.
It was just took the three voices and somehow
I made it
into four.
Yeah, and discovered that with that fourth voice, I could do some cool things that I hadn't been able to do with the three. So both versions work really well.
This is an interesting ensemble. I've never heard of, flute, oboe, clarinet ensemble. I always hear, flute, oboe, clarinet, and then horn and bassoon, like a woodwind quintet.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what their reasoning was for forming this trio. They're all at the University of Alabama. And so I don't know what their initial reasoning was to have it be a upper wind trio. But you're right. It is an interesting. The absence of a low instrument challenges you as a composer. It challenged me.
I didn't even miss it though when I was listening to it. I listened to the whole way through, and I didn't feel like I missed the low end.
Good.
I think the way that you handled it is I didn't play it. You have to listen to the whole thing down description below, but because I'm only putting the first couple of minutes. But the second movement I think is what kind of makes the piece work, because it's such a slow kind of these kind of long kind of phrases and things like this that help, because if you just play the first and third movement back to back, a lot of it is very similar and
right, too frenetic,
and that kind of thing, and it doesn't show off the kind of what the instruments want. The players want to show off how good their tone quality is, and all those years they work to produce that kind of sound on their instrument. I think that's one of the highlights of that piece.
Well, thank you. They liked the middle movement the best too.
Oh, so really? There you go.
You're in good company with the performers there. Yeah. Well, it's always, this. I mean, it's so gratifying to work with performers who are eager to play a piece of yours, and B, performers who are really good and then invest the level of energy and rehearsal time and attention to detail in your piece to really bring out what it can be. And when that's done at its best, then you, the composer, discover the piece blossoms in ways that you hadn't even anticipated. And that's what they did. They're really, really great players, and they really brought it to life.
Yeah, and this idea of also adapting a piece that you wrote for another ensemble, also, I really love this idea, and I've been doing it a lot lately because it's just so much work to get the first version there. And then oftentimes you just want to all right, that's it. I want to move on to something else. But if it's a strong idea, why not let different kind of players go with it too?
Yeah, absolutely. And in this case, of course, you brought up the point that you'd never heard of a flute, clarinet, oboe trio. So it's not like the piece is going to be just flying off the shelves in its original instrumentation.
Right.
But how many saxophone quartets are there out there?
Right.
Well, you can't throw a rock without hitting one, and so there are lots of great saxophone quartets. So I thought, this material would really lend itself to that ensemble equally well.
Yeah, I've done a similar thing, but with string quartet. I would take my string quartet that I wrote and then adapt it for saxophone quartet.
Right.
I think that's the only time I've done something like that for saxophones, adapting it from strings, but adapting it from other winds. I never thought of doing something like that.
Yeah.
But I feel like that kind of idea also of adapting instruments for other ensembles, it's not something that I see that often in my silos, my circles here. A lot of times people are writing things that are so specific that can only be played by certain instruments that they cannot be adapted. And then it kind of lives and dies with the first performance.
Right.
Even if it's a great piece, because it's so specific to that.
So on the airplane on the way here, I listened to, I can't think of the name. Your pieces have names that I can't remember. But
they're like old Arabic names.
The electric guitar and keyboard.
Oh, the sedect. That one is not Arabic. That's just a made-up word.
But as a case in point of a really specific instrumentation of a piece that's an amazing piece of music, Saad. That's amazing.
I appreciate that.
And yet it would be really almost impossible to translate that to any other ensemble.
Yeah, and I haven't. That's it.
How could you? I mean, what would that guitar part become? You can't, that couldn't become harp.
No, or I don't know. I haven't.
So, but it's a great example of, there are lots of terrific pieces that just aren't easily adaptable across other instruments. But then the ones that are, it can be both a really good, very satisfying creative choice to adapt it, but it can also just be a savvy, sales choice that the piece suddenly will get programmed a whole lot more.
Or not. It could be. It could go both ways, but it's also a creative exercise too to see. Like how can I take this material and it's reorchestration.
Right.
It's something that we do when we were growing up. Taking orchestration class.
Right.
Orchestrate a Liszt piano piece for orchestra. It's almost like the same kind of thing, but we're doing it with our own pieces.
Right.
But I feel like for some reason at least in my circles, there's a stigma behind it. It's like, you're just
come to the middle of the country.
I know,
There's no
right?
stigma. There's no stigma.
I mean, I do it anyway. I do my own thing. I kind of just do my own thing and not worry about it. But you hear that noise, you hear that talk. But I enjoy doing it because I know
I'm actually baffled by that. I mean, the Adagio for strings that we all love is an adaptation.
I actually didn't know that. It is from what?
A string quartet. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And the Fanfare for the Common Man appears in a larger symphonic work, and Bernstein's Trouble in Tahiti then became part of a larger operatic work. Like they're the people that we revere, people that were from New York, did this all the time.
Not to mention like the Bach partitas, and they're all different. Every single instrument.
Long dead people, but I think that there's certainly no. I can't think of what the stigma would be attached to.
And my philosophy, at least, if you want to talk about money and royalties and all that stuff, is while we're alive, why don't we enjoy the copyright, laws as they exist? Because 70 years after we pass, that's it. That's it.
Right.
It's done. So why can't we just enjoy whatever royalties might come from adapting our pieces? It's our piece. Why not? So. As long as it doesn't take time away from writing new music, that's the way that because if I'm just living in the past, rehashing all my older pieces, that's a problem, right? But as long as you're continuing to write new stuff and keeping the older stuff alive by making new versions of it, I don't see what the issue is.
Right.
But,
I've got a few of my older pieces that when a dry spell comes, when commissions are lagging for a few months, I've got a few that I've got in my head, that would make a great band piece, or I should just do a piano only version of that, or there are a few of mine that I think still have life in other incarnations, but like you say, you don't want to take the time away from your next project to do that. So I have a wish list of things that'll happen when I get a dry spell.
Yeah, I've done the same thing, the same exact thing, especially during COVID. I was making a lot of arrangements of, like, I have this piece for violin and piano. I was like, why can't I just make it for viola and piano, cello and piano? Right. And then I kind of went crazy with it and did flute and piano, and things that kind of were farther away from violin and piano. Right. But why not? It's not hurting anyone. And if I have the time and want to do it, what's the big deal? So anyway, maybe this is just me on the East Coast thinking in my East Coast way, but it sounds like from where you are and what your normal interactions are, it's a normal thing. It's not even something that people think about twice.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I wouldn't think about that twice, and it's just a matter of a time calculation for me of whether I have the time to do it. And sometimes I even had colleagues who were interested in adapting a piece of mine, let them do the adaptation. They've got the time, and that way we get the adaptation. So yeah, I can't. All of music history agrees with the adapting idea.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know who it is that originated the not adapting, but yeah.
Well, thanks for coming by. I mean,
this
was a lot of fun. Please check out Stephen Lias' website down in the description below, and those two pieces I played are also down in the description below. So thanks again for coming.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.